You're in.
Distinguished speaker, dear all, I'm pleased and honored to welcome you to our 2 days event to celebrate the International Women's Day 2022, whose theme is Changing Climate, Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow. Co-organized by the Union for the Mediterranean, the Regional Office for Near East and North Africa, or FAO, and the International Center for Advanced Mediterranean Agronomic Studies, our 2 days debate will offer the opportunity to identify key challenges to be addressed when it comes to women as key change driver for a more resilient agri-food system facing climate change. To propose possible solutions in terms of policies, strategies, and governance at regional country levels, to share good practices and experiences from the civil society organizations. Before giving the floor to our first speakers, let me share just a couple of tips for a smoother running of the event. Simultaneous translations are available in English, French, and Arabic. You can post comments and questions on our chat, and we will address them during our question and answer session. The event will is also live streamed on our Facebook page and on the UfM page. Without any further ado, I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Abdelhakim El-Aouar, Assistant Director General and Regional Representative of the Regional Office for the Near East and North Africa, or FAO. Dr. El-Aouar served as Secretary of Environmental General Authority of the Government of Libya in Tripoli, and he was elected President of the African Ministerial Congress on Environment from 2004 to 2006. During his career at the African Union, he supervised and managed the establishment of several African unique initiatives and institutions. Dr. El-Aouar, the floor is yours.
Anna, thank you very much. I really have no words to express my pleasure to join you here today. I've had a delegation in Cairo coming from Rome at the headquarters of FAO to discuss with the Egyptian authorities the preparations for COP27, and you know how intensive this process is. So I had to leave them today. They were at the League of Arab States, to come back to the office to be able to join you, and I'll be going back to them afterwards. So glad to, of course, address all the distinguished speakers, all the participants, colleagues, and friends. And thanks from our side to Valentina for all the efforts, as usual, for our engagement. It is indeed a great pleasure for me to welcome all participants to this webinar, jointly organized with the FAO, CIHEAM, as well as the Union for Mediterranean, my old partners. I've had long interactions with them in Barcelona to mark the celebration of the International Women's Day. This year, we come together under a very important theme, gender equality today for a sustainable tomorrow. What a theme. We come together to recognize and celebrate the women and girls who are leading the change on climate change, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction. Today, in particular, we gather to celebrate the key role that women could play and are playing in agri-food systems as farmers, livestock keepers, fisher folks, foresters, and water users, and to acknowledge their critical contribution to the management and preservation of natural resources, increasingly challenged by the impact of climate change as well as water scarcity in the Middle East and North Africa region. FAO recognizes that harnessing on women's knowledge and skills and ensuring their leadership in climate actions is fundamental to accelerate any efforts to promote greener and more sustainable agri-food systems in the MENA region. We see it every day through our projects in the field. Rural women are powerful agents in building community resilience, and they are powerful agents for change. More often than men, women tend to make decisions about resource use and investments in the interest of their children, families, and communities, providing a key contribution to their food security and nutrition. As economic and political actors, women are also more likely to influence policies and institutions towards the provision of public goods, such as water and energy, health and social infrastructure, which are fundamental to support climate resilience and disaster preparedness. Yet, we also see every day how women's contribution is constrained by persisting gender biases and discriminations. Across the region, women continue to have systematically less access than men to key agricultural assets, inputs, financing, technologies, and services due to discriminatory policy frameworks or harmful social norms. Let us just think of the fact that only around 5% of women own land or property in the MENA region, one of the lowest percentages in the world. In many contexts, these inequalities are what makes women and girls disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change. So while we come together to celebrate women's role and contribution, we must recognize that the road to achieve gender equality is still long and winding. We must also recognize that the impacts of climate change are not neutral. They are actually amplifying existing gender inequalities. As FAO, we have consistently stressed the importance of eliminating these inequalities as one of the most effective mechanisms to build the climate resilience of agri-food systems in the region. This is why FAO projects across the region, especially those funded under the Global Environment Facility, GEF, and the Green Climate Fund, GCF, work to leverage local women's groups and institutions to strengthen their voice in decision-making process related to climate change adaptation. Through the use of community-based and participatory approaches, such as the Farmers' Field Schools, FAO interventions aim to provide rural women with equal opportunities to access climate-smart practices and technologies, and enhance their capacities to cope with impact of climate change. At the policy level, FAO continues to invest in the generation of knowledge on the gender gaps in agriculture and rural sector to support informed and gender-responsive policies and programs that make a difference to build the resilience of rural women and girls in the region. We recognize, however, that much needs to be done to bring this work at scale and ensure that women, especially in rural areas, have equal opportunities to lead and thrive. In this sense, I hope this webinar is just a first step to tighten FAO's collaboration with CIHEAM, the Union for Mediterranean, and the organizations and partners participating in the event today to consolidate and accelerate our efforts. I would like, before I come to the end, maybe share some experience that I had from my previous interaction when we worked on the at the Islamic Development Bank. There was it's important story. There was a fund that was dedicated for empowering women in rural areas in Benin. And it was a fund that was created for some $70 million at that time. And I was overseeing the delivery of the fund. Amazingly, it was one of the small financial structures at the 5 billion annual spending of the Islamic Development Bank that was coming into a very low risk on return of the loans, and it was completely dedicated to women empowerment in the rural areas. So the commitment from women farmers and women living in the rural areas to pay back the loans was much higher than any of the other funds that we had at that time, including the sovereign funds for the countries and the other one more structured. And this is basically individuals with no collaterals, with no guarantees, with no even land ownership, and they're still committed to return back for the regeneration and the benefit of the other members of the community. And that's, I think, a very practical indication that I've lived myself of how investing in women is really worth and generate return on investment besides the creation of jobs and the prosperity of the livelihood in the rural areas. So let me end by saying that the message is very clear. Climate change is the challenge of our time, and it's going to stay with us for quite some time. Maybe we will retire and we'll still see these challenges ongoing. But without gender equality, a sustainable future remains beyond our reach. Of course, I shouldn't forget our efforts on food waste and food loss. Our efforts on zero hunger under SDG 2 will also remain at question as the whole region is off track to achieve these SDGs by 2030. And without the participation of women into the process and ensuring gender equality, they will remain beyond our reach by 2030. So I thank you all for listening, and really thank you for this participation. I look forward for the outcome of this webinar and the recommendations. And more importantly, Valentina, at our level here, how can we transform some of these recommendations into actionable projects and programs on the ground that we can execute together with our partners here? So I'll stop here, and I would like to take permission also. I will be following for quite some time your discussions, but I may have to withdraw at certain time as I have other engagement. I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you to you, Dr. Helawar. Thank you very much for your valuable contribution, but especially also for sharing with us some concrete examples, confirming that what we were saying at the beginning, that climate action is for women and with women, because as you said, they are the ones who can also be more reliable when we talk of women in rural areas in terms of access to finance. And climate finance will be another topic where the UfM, hopefully also with FAO and CIHEAM, will work together during this year. And I'm now pleased to introduce our second speaker, and Dr. Hélène Lemaitre-Curie. She's Deputy Director at CIHEAM Montpellier. Before, she was Director of Plan Bleu for the Environment and Development in the Mediterranean, subsequently Head of Office for Global Public Goods at the French Ministry of Environment, as well as economist at the FAO Economist Center. Dr. Lemaitre-Curie, the floor is all yours now. Thank you.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you very much for this invitation to celebrate the International Day of Women, and a topic which is extremely important for CIHEAM. If you don't know, the CIHEAM is an organization, an intergovernmental organization of 13 Mediterranean countries, 4 institutes around the Mediterranean, and a secretariat in Paris. The CIHEAM, the countries from the Mediterranean, work together to strengthen the research, training, and cooperation on the agriculture, on the fisheries, the agri-food and rural development. Our webinar is crucial for CIHEAM and all these organizations. As you know, the effects of the climate change will aggravate in Mediterranean, a situation which is itself complicated for the agri-food system. above all in the northern Mediterranean countries. A group of experts studying the impact of the climatic impacts. Last year, the MED group shows perfectly how the Mediterranean is a hotspot of climate change and is increasing the fragilities and vulnerabilities existent as access to the water, vulnerabilities of the soils, and a huge dependence of the import accentuated by the demographic growth. We know in the Mediterranean there is a challenge of the people don't have access to the jobs and the unemployment, and the agri-food system is not attractive and cannot employ the youngsters and the women. And the rural areas are affected, and even though the pandemic has aggravated this phenomena, women are affected by all those challenges. As it has been stressed by the FAO colleagues, they don't have access to the resources, to the land, the training, and to modernize their activities of the agri-food systems. They are not visible. They work in informal fields, works in very low remunerated jobs, and they have and follow some rules that will limit their autonomy, their empowerment. Women are the first affected, and they have to manage all the lackings because they diminish things in order to benefit the others. When men leave the rural areas, women staying there have to manage the agri-food system. And the work of our colleagues show how the women's working in the agriculture is the more and more important. And finally, in Northern Africa and Middle East, women are more affected with the food imbalances, with the prevalence of the obesity, which is a great problem on public health in Northern Africa and the Middle East. We have to integrate all those challenges in all our activities, and we have to make participate our partnership as it shows participation to our webinar. We know that adapted training and support of the rules and the standards and the laws, women of those areas could play a higher role in the agri-food systems, more reliable, more sustainable, in order to have more resilient systems to the climate change and to maintain a heritage which is extremely important in order to value the jobs of the land and the sea, in order to show how they react and to invent systems that are more modern, more remunerated, better remunerated, and the appropriation of the digitalization. CIHEAM will contribute throughout training, research, cooperation, institutional dialogue, in order to make that the agro-food systems should be a very an important level, and a huge participation of the women in the decision-making systems. CIHEAM is engaged in the preparation in the gender equality that we have adopted in Montpellier recently, in order to contribute the equality inside of our activities, but having taken into account much more the women in the research activities, the knowledge disseminated in the Mediterranean area, and make the women take part in the regional cooperation. We will try from now onwards to mobilize women, and we have working groups in order to make progress with our partners that we thank FAO and the Union for the Mediterranean, these partnerships that are very important for us, and we will taking into account all the witnesses that we can collect today in order to have messages, concrete examples that we will bring about in the next ministerial meeting of CIHEAM that will take place in Morocco in autumn, in October 2022, based on those questions. Thank you very much, and thank you for all the examples of messages that we will convey in order to feed this collective reflection that will help us to recognize the role of the women that can play in the future in these essential transitions in the Near East and the south bank of the Mediterranean. Thank you. Thank you very much for your intervention. And I will give the floor right now our moderator, Madame Yasmin Sedirak, that is going to moderate this session. She's going to speak French, and the participants, they could choose French, English, or Arabic. Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you, and I'm very happy of this collaboration with the FAO, the Union for the Mediterranean, that they are working on this important topic. I am very happy to be able to moderate this session that will gather very important experts. And today we are going to understand far better how the Day of the Women and the Day of the Rise of Women on the agri-food, resilience, and all the challenges, the climate change. I don't know if Mrs. Ana Iglesias is linked, because we should have to start with Ana Iglesias. Ana Iglesias is there. Otherwise, I will give the floor to Mrs. Dina Najjar, if Mrs. Iglesias is not here. Dina, you are a scientist, expert on this INCARDA, which is the International Center of the Agricultural Research. You are anthropologist, and your work is concentrated on the link, because gender equality, food and agri-technologies, the migration, the rural women, and to adaptation to the climate change, affecting the access to the land and the property in the Middle East and Northern Africa. With your experience in INCARDA and with experience in this geographical region, can you tell us why gender is so important for the adaptation to the climate change and to strengthening the resilience in the Middle East and Northern Africa? And you can also tell us how the gender equality could contribute to this climate resilience and to the sustainable agri-food. You have the floor, Dina.
Can you hear me? I'm having some connection problems. Can you hear me? Perfectly. Awesome. Merci beaucoup for this invitation. So I'm happy to talk about why is gender important for climate change and resilience. Gender is important because it allows us to address policy blind spots that, albeit unintentionally, reproduce gender inequality and marginalization. And this is something that the first speaker has touched on. So, for example, I think the strongest example I could give is labeling women as housewives on their national IDs. And this marginalizes them from microcredit, from many programs that rural programs or urban programs that aim to alleviate the impacts of climate. The other reason why gender is important is because it enables us to work with men. It enables us to work with norms across scales, and not only in isolation with women. And this is important because women in the region need to be validated for many of the roles that they do, but they are not validated in these roles. So very simply, the role being farmers in rural areas, we see many instances where, during the course of the pandemic and before, where digital extension was used, and it was started with Dear Brother Farmer. So you can see how much this can, you can imagine how the language can exclude women from these messages. I mean, obviously also the issue of phone ownership. In Egypt, we've done many studies. We found that women seems to be, a lot of women are owning cell phones, but this is not the case in Tunisia. So there are some context-specific barriers that we need to address when we want to disseminate information that will strengthen resilience of the rural communities. Why is gender important? It's also important because it teaches us that technologies are not neutral. So technologies related to drip irrigation, for example, can actually lead to job gains for many women, and lead to migration, internal migration from rural, from less drier areas to these more resource endowed areas. But at the same time, the working conditions are not adequate. So these surges in wage work are predicated on cheap women labor, and they have their own ways to deal with discrimination in wages, with low wages, and also they are paid less for the same job that men do. So what I'm trying to say here is that technologies are not just technologies. They have social implications, and they need to be coupled with social and technical bundles. So we also need to address the quality of these jobs, and not only focus on creating more jobs for women, but also more quality jobs. And this can be done with social protection, strengthening social protection, training women on jobs that are higher paid, like pruning, and also because they're marginalized from these jobs as they grow up. And also, I would like to talk a bit about the issue of climate change and migration. So we have seen in many places in the MENA region where we have seen different kinds of impacts related to migration. The first one is women and men as migrants themselves. And I have talked a bit about that in the sense that seasonal work in the peak season where there's water, there's a surge in mobility to these places to participate in wage work. But also there's instances where men are migrating or they are leaving agriculture because of land fragmentation. And women are doing most of this agricultural work. But at the same time, they are not represented in local institutions like water user associations and even in rangeland management groups. We've worked in communities where there's a lot of male out-migration, and women are the ones that are taking the livestock for grazing. But at the same time, you go into a pastoral collective and you found no women there. And this seems to be strongly also reproduced in the policy circles, where there's a belief that women are not involved in rangeland use or grazing, or even in irrigation. They're trained on domestic water issues, but not on irrigation, when they are actually doing these types of work. I wanted to talk about land rights. This was mentioned in the beginning of the talk. In fact, the Middle East and North Africa region has the lowest land ownership rate for women on the planet. And this is a very, very complicated subject. And we've worked with women who were given land in a resettlement scheme in Egypt. This has to do with alleviating population pressure. It has to do with adapting to climate change and rising water level. So many reasons this resettlement scheme, so many issues, problems this resettlement scheme was trying to address. And women were given 20% of the land titles. And we worked with these women intergenerationally, and we found that they were not willing to give their daughters land because they were worried that their in-laws will not share their beliefs that women can own land, and they were worried that they will alienate this land from their daughters. So they were more focused on their daughters' education, and they wanted to protect them from farming. They didn't want them to work, marry into households where women are doing farming. They wanted them to marry into households where women are not going to the land. So this also shows that for women, farming, as well as men, farming is an option of last resort. So we really need to do a lot to change these opportunities for women, because if we're trying to empower them, we need to make sure that there are choices, and this is a choice that it's not just an option of last resort. In short, I guess the policy recommendations would relate to making sure that policies are also coupled with awareness raising, so that their policies alone are not enough. They are important, but not enough. The issue of land, of women bequeathing land to their sons is a case in point. And also that technologies are not neutral, that we also need to make sure that they are coupled with social interventions, so that, for example, the case of drip irrigation in Morocco leading to job creation, but also the working conditions need to be addressed. And these policies are some of these policies to make this these jobs more decent. Some of these policies are already there. For example, equal pay, punishment to sexual harassment. These policies are already there, but they're not being implemented. It's also an issue of practice, not just the policy and gender norms, and and also the issue of in Egypt, women being housewives on their IDs. I think this is, albeit unintentionally, a regressive policy, which hopefully we can all agree on and get eliminated. I know UN Women is doing some work on that, because women are farmers, women are wage workers, but they are not called as such. And this can marginalize them from access to social protection, like farmer pension, projects, and so on. I think this is my intervention so far. I'm happy to take any questions and participate in the discussion. Yasmin, thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup, Dina. Merci. Oui, je ne l'ai pas précisé.
Thank you very much, Dina. I didn't precise as for my introduction. There will be a moment for exchanging questions and answers at the end of the talks, so that the participants might raise their questions. Thank you very much, Dina, for this clear presentation. You are connecting the subjects together, and it is very interesting as for the generation renovation. The average age of the farmers is around 50 years old, and the children do not want to take it on, and so there is much to think about this agricultural sector and digitalization. I think it is these issues are very important. We should be able to keep finding out what can be done and the much advocacy work. I will hand over to Wafa Dika. Wafa, be welcome. You are main advisor at the international cooperation at the Lebanese Ministry of Agriculture. You are also a regional consultant as for empowerment of women and equality of sex, gender equalty, and delegate from Lebanon at the Council of Administration of the CIHEAM. You've been working the FAO, the Arab League, and between 24 and 25, you were the first Lebanese woman. You are an actress on the parliamentary and political stage. You have a transversal and unique view about these levers that we can implement, as well as these partnership synergies. This woman should be able to contribute to the resilience of agri-food systems to face climate change. Could you share with us the main challenges that you've seen, as well as the solutions that you are recommending to put forward, focusing maybe on the challenges of policy making and governance? Thank you, Wafa.
Thank you very much, Yasmin, and I salute all the participants in this very interesting panel discussion, and I'm really glad to join you in this on the occasion of the International Women's Day. I salute all your efforts as well, women and men, in our struggle and efforts to alleviate burdens of gender inequalities in various sectors and amid all the crises, whether national or international or at the global level. You know, talking about the challenges, really, I mean, this is wide, and but I will try to focus a bit on the policy-related challenges from the perspective of Lebanon's commitment to the climate change efforts. And I would like to state a few facts before I go into the challenges. Recently, Lebanon, amid its persistent political, economic, and financial crisis, did not ignore climate change challenges. In fact, it was the impacts were foreseen as a multiplier factor to the multifold crisis. And Lebanon, because of that, it renewed its commitment at the COP26 to greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, confirming that such a climate change actions must be really at the heart of the Lebanon's recovery plans. The second fact is related to the NDC update of 2020, which was presented with improved gender integration and inclusiveness, prioritizing vulnerable groups in climate actions. And as the updated plan states, that it strives to fully integrate the gender in order to enhance implementation and consider vulnerable groups. The last fact is related to the NDC update as well, where agriculture sector resilience and sustainable use of natural resources were identified among the adaptation priorities. Actually, I want to really, from these commitments and at the high policy level, for me, the challenge really lies in how to create more linkages between such commitments and the existing institutional capacities at the national level, and also the existing gender inequalities. I mean, these are really the heart of the of the challenge from my own perspective, and also based on the analysis that has been also recently assessed in Lebanon more thoroughly on the extent of gender responsiveness and its climate-related policies. This is the baseline scenario was that the link between climate change and gender is not yet clearly established, eventually, obviously. And the gender analysis revealed a lot of gaps and challenges faced by the institutions, whether institutions are directly linked to gender equality or at the level of institutions who are directly linked with climate change. So this gap really is huge. So gender is not systematically mainstreamed into climate change policies and planning, and therefore the gender responsiveness of climate change at the level of these policies and planning are irregular and vary across sectors. Another point linked to this is that such policies, if they exist, they face constraints related to the proper implementation means and resources. Financial resources, sometimes senior level commitments, and implementation procedures. So I want to also point out here that at the level of the agriculture sector, the last agriculture strategy 2020-2025 was identified among the most responsive to gender and climate change through integrating gender equality as a cross-cutting issue across all its pillars, with also a set of targeting women beneficiaries, up to 30% to be of the beneficiaries of all the interventions, and also with a standalone objective on improving climate change adaptation and sustainable management of agri-food systems. So the point really doesn't lie, it is important to have it at the policy level, but it is more important to have it also with supported with the resources, with the commitments, and also with the implementation procedures. Another gap, I see it really eminent, is the gender equality that are, in general, the strategies are in nature not sector specific. There is lack sometimes of awareness at the technical skills and capacity surrounding gender responsive climate actions in gender and in climate institutions. I give an example of the National Strategy for Women, which is the roadmap for the commission responsible for women issues in Lebanon to promote gender equality. And there is also it linked the positive role of women that they can play with men to improve social behaviors, to mitigate climate change, and to adapt to its impact. Their role at the household level, they link it to the household management, to education of children. I mean, these are important. However, they confine women to the household boundaries, and they really stay silent on the potential roles of women as leaders and agents of change, like the examples that we just also heard from Dina in the previous presentation. So we need really to involve and to pinpoint on these potential on the leadership roles that are being played by women, and there are many of these. We shouldn't really, I mean, our policies and strategies shouldn't remain silent on bringing these up. So also another gap, which is also the scarcity of national and sectoral sex disaggregated data related to climate change and gender. And there is a need for data that defines clearly the impact, the potentialities, the opportunities for both men and women across the different intersections and sectors, including age group, intersectionalities, geographic distribution, disabilities. So we need, our policies really need and interventions need to consider the fact that women and men are differently affected by climate change, and therefore their needs and contributions must be assessed and considered in planning and implementation from this particular angle. Lebanon at times of crisis also failed to really have the gender responsive approaches unfortunately. I mean, I am just being a bit critical about my country today, but this is definitely, there are a lot of positive interventions, and there is political and will at the same time at this level, but also when we need to evaluate our interventions at times of crisis, we have to look at it from really to how much it was responsive to all the needs of both women and men. Food security issues imposed a big challenge in Lebanon as poverty continued to really increase. We had in 2021 like 34% of Lebanese and 50% of the refugees and the migrants in Lebanon, they were identified as food insecure. Women were among the most affected groups of the population, whether from the Lebanese or from the 1.5 million refugees and migrants. They work in the informal sector, they earn the least income, and they benefit the least from social protection coverage, yet the response plan tend to be gender neutral. So in shifting to the what should be done, I don't know how much time I still have, but quickly, we need really to translate these policies and strategies to be able to address the different needs of the population in a gender sensitive and inclusive approach, and to unleash the great potentialities of both women and men, like this seminar aims. So for me, really, there should be a clear understanding of that women vulnerability to climate change is not because women are themselves weak. Policymakers really should understand that this is really rather because of the gender inequalities and the socially constructed roles ascribed to both women and men. There is the social structure and the cultural beliefs. I can mention a lot in the concept note of this webinar. They are listed also, I don't want to repeat, but they apply to the situation of women, especially the differences from between rural and urban areas. Women's share of in agriculture vis-a-vis the burden on their shoulders, which still, I mean, the social structure and cultural beliefs justify extensive role in unpaid work and can limit women's free time, and also they limit their opportunities. The same also for the inequalities with the legal frameworks and the discriminations. The land inheritance is a big issue also on that. It deprives a lot of women from the reduced reliance on male relatives, and increasing their bargaining power if they have the ownership. And like mentioned earlier, it gives them the opportunity to benefit from the credits and the extension. So, so in this particular direction, I would like to mention that this identified key weaknesses of the climate change and the gender nexus in Lebanon could provide several entry points to improve the climate change and to gender institutional environment, and through concrete governance, policy, and planning recommendations. Lebanon outlined the gender responsive climate solutions into action under the Lebanon's approach. And it has developed 7-step process to provide the framework for the integration of gender sensitive climate action at the sectoral level. So starting with the gender analysis that was conducted and provided a lot of information, and I mentioned a few of the weaknesses and gaps. Then identifying the sectoral prioritization, where 3 main sectors were prioritized for inclusion, which is the energy, waste, and water. Agriculture, in fact, was in a way, I mean, there were like interrelations with these 3, but we need to work more on the agriculture to be an integral part of this integrated gender inclusion priorities, due to the fact that it is mostly impacted by the climate change, and also to the gender inequalities that need to be addressed. The third step was identifying in gender indicators and linkages, and the fourth was organizing the capacity building. So this increased awareness and capacity building on the importance and benefits of such gender responsiveness has ensured really the consequent inclusion of in the process of the gender lens in the process of the NDC updates. Also, the fifth pillar was developing the standard operating procedures for gender mainstreaming at the sectoral levels. And I think these are really very important, and especially for involving relevant actors and for assessing the situation and also empowering the gender focal points in each ministry and reinforce their roles in the implementation of the climate change and gender responsive action plans. And the seven was the integrate gender into climate related project and the processes. There are also, I'm sorry, maybe I have to stop and I leave maybe some examples later to the discussion. And sorry for being a bit long on the time.
Non, merci Wafa. Non, c'était un plaisir
Thank you, Wafa. No, it was a pleasure to listen to you. We will have some time for discussion afterwards. Thank you very much, Wahab. I will give the floor to Sarah Ahmed. Saida, you are in charge of the management of programs about knowledge of risks. So we are going to make a transition to policies in crisis situation. You are regional head as for knowledge of risk for the Office of Arab States, UN, the Office of United Nations for reduction of risk of catastrophe. Your organization launched today, unveiled the leadership report of women within the reduction of risk in times of catastrophes, an example for Arab states. This compilation is collecting the best practices that wish to highlight how women and girls are positioned as leaders in the adaptation to climate change and the efforts for risk reductions and catastrophes in Arab countries. I know that you would like to share a video about Yemen, which is touching, and we can hope through it a better future. We are going to launch to play the video, and then I will come back to you vis-à-vis your activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, respected colleagues, excellencies, and dear panelists. It's an honor to be with you all today, just after the launch of our Women Leadership publication. So I just, jumped from there to here. So I hope that, I can shed some light on the work that we have been doing, why are we doing it, and what was a purpose behind it. So,
merci Sarah. Oui, donc pardon, je vous pose
finalement. Thank you, Sarah. Let me ask you a question from your report that you just played. According to you, which are the main factors allowing to overcome prejudices and as for women leadership and all these important factors, which can be the role played by men within these transformations? Thank you, Saira. You have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. I think it's a very interesting question, Yasmin. when you talk about, because I am the regional gender focal point from UNDRR, Regional Office for Arab State. So we always say that gender, when we talk about it, it's about women, but it's not. It's about women, boys, girls, and men. So we cannot exclude men from the gender perspective. When it comes to women's leadership or women empowerment, they are being facing why, when we were developing this publication, the work that we have been doing since last 5 years in Egypt and in the region. So we found out that there are so many challenges that had been faced by women, and it's not only the Arab world, let me be honest, it's globally. Even the most developed countries have issues. So the issues is to accept the women as they are and to accept their decision making at different levels of development. As I am representing the Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, so definitely I'm going to talk about DRR. So we felt that women are discriminated, especially in terms when the disaster happens. They are not prioritized. Their needs and concerns of vulnerable groups in disasters, including women, men, people with disabilities, their needs are usually neglected, and that's why they suffer a lot. On the other hand, we realize that there is a need to integrate their needs and concerns into disaster risk management efforts for all of the countries, and that's why we are developing this gender strategy on DRR, and it is still under the development process. What we learned through this publication on women leadership is that women needs to be prioritized by everybody, and at the policy level there needs to be included. And when we talk about the policy level, in many of the countries are still male dominated in senior level positions and things. I'm sure there are so many male speakers and colleagues here as well, but I would like to share that we find that it's sometimes hard for a woman to fight for their survival, for their recognition, and to share that why because male and female are different and they have different priorities, different needs. Even in disasters, we say that they have been discriminated. Disasters do not discriminate. People do. And how people do is not to prioritize needs of lactating women, the pregnant woman, women with other issues, and there are so many other areas. So through this publication, what we try to do is to highlight the women's empowered role in the region. And we were very happy to see that in many of the countries, because we received the case studies from the national governments of Algeria, Iraq, Mauritania, Lebanon, UAE, and Somalia, and various other countries. So these case studies came from the national governments, and then also we received the case studies from our UN partners, agencies, civil society network, etc., and researchers, academics. So that's why we try to include, to have this inclusive approach, to give an opportunity to all of them to share how women came forward in situation of this global pandemic of COVID-19, how they suffered, how they combat this risk in everyday life. So it was a long journey for us actually to come through this. It took us 2 years to develop this report. It wasn't easy, but we came up through several ideas, and it is a joint publication, because when we were working on this women leadership idea, so it was developed with the help of and support of the Gender Equality and Women Empowerment Group, and our co-chair Amal, I think she's also be presenting today. So we realized that this publication constitutes an initial step in documenting the experiences and collecting and sharing gender responsive DRRs and lessons learned from across the Arab States region, and covers the DRR initiatives aimed at reducing the impact of disasters on women. And for us, it was really important to share because it was one of its first kind in the Arab States region and draws from documented experiences of mainstreaming gender in disaster risk reduction, collected through desk review and consultation with so many experts. When we received different case studies, we also divided them into different themes for instance, integrating gender into community-based disaster reduction, how communities communities are the first responder in case of disaster. So it is thus logical that community-based DRR form the core of any risk reduction approach. And then we also had this theme on the woman on the front line, the fight against COVID-19. So when we started this, it was in 2019, we started the concept. In 2020, we actually made the process faster. So at that time, COVID-19 was at the peak. So we got several information, and we realized that how COVID-19 pandemic has charged pre-existing volatile situations around the world through the additional stress placed on fragile healthcare, political and economic systems. And as an international community continues to relay, women peace builders have mobilized to mitigate the threats arising in their local communities, because who are the ones who are saving their children and families? They are always women, and they're mostly women. I cannot just say always, maybe there are men as well, but usually women are the ones who are protecting their families, their children, and even older people. So that's why we identified several case studies that was shared to us by the government of Lebanon, by Tunisia, by UAE, and then we thought to focus our area on gender mainstreaming for sustainable development, because the importance of gender mainstreaming for sustainable development is highlighted in the SDGs. So we highlighted that as well, that how the full participation of equal involvement of women are needed to achieve the 3 pillars of SDGs, which includes environmental sustainability, economic sustainability, and social sustainability. We also talked about preventing and responding to gender-based violence, because we have observed that, and globally it has been proven that during this COVID-19 issue, the gender-based violence increased a lot, because how they differ. It has shown how this prevalence and severity within communities experience the effects of a disaster, and is rooted in gender inequality and unequal power relations. We are not here talking about the power gap between men and female. We just see that there should be an equal opportunities for all. And thus integrating GBV services into disaster-related services can help ensure the continuation of GBV services during times of disasters. And lastly, we discussed in our publication the gender-responsive DRR in the agriculture and water sector. And the climate-related hazards are putting natural resources used by community members, particularly women at risk. And this has not least affected developing countries, where women are typically responsible for securing water, food, and energy for cooking and heating. And we found so many good case studies from several agencies. And one of the case study just shared was by FAO and UfM together for Yemen. So, I mean, that's what was the process, that how we came to develop this leadership document. And we faced a lot of challenges, definitely, but we had this opportunity for the countries to speak up and share their experiences at different levels, whether it was at political level, whether it is from academic level, research level, or whatever, to come up with the ideas of bringing their women at the forefront for development. And I think it was a good initiative. I think it was successful, because we came to know and we learned a lot. It was a very nice experience, and we continue to work towards it. Thank you.
Merci vraiment, Saira.
Thank you very much, Saira. Thank you very much for those precisions that you have given to us. We are very honored to share this report of the best practices that can be disseminated in other sectors. Thank you very much, Saira. And now I will give the floor to Mrs. Ala Jayab. Ala, are you there? Ala, are you there? You coordinator of the different activities and relationship with communities of urban agriculture in Gaza. This platform is called UBAT, and during the last years, the UBAT has helped many women working in the agriculture bringing them activities of the building capacities, training them, giving them technical support. And thanks to this forum that joins urban entrepreneurs, women have been able to be certificated, they have had access to the market, and they have had their voice heard. What can you tell us of this experience on this forum, and how this forum has been able to help women in order to strengthen resilience in face of the climate change? But not only that, because you wanted to accompany in this conflict period, in the period of the pandemic COVID-19. Can you share the experiences and give us the recipe, what has made this success of this experience? Hala, you have the floor. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. Hala? Thank you very much, and I will salute you from Gaza. First of all, I want to thank in order to organize this webinar, this day, this significant day, concerning the urban agriculture and quasi-urban agriculture. I'm going to share my experience with you. At the Gaza level, peri-urban agriculture, we have adopted policies in order to strengthen the resilience and sovereignty of the agri-food in Gaza. As you know, from the year 2020, with the leadership of several friends, we have invested with the farmers and the small groups of the agriculture sector. In this platform, what we do, we try to raise awareness in the urban agriculture from the agriculture or farming principles, new ones and moderns. This platform, we have tried to initiate a local area in order to plant near the cities in urban areas, because we have tried to, first of all, we started with 100 people that were landowners in the small projects on the agriculture level. Projects are based on production of different plants, the fisheries, the apiculture, and other activities in the agri-food sector. The forum wanted to find out a space in order to be able to gather all those persons, all those entrepreneurs, in order to share their experiences, their ideas, and to adopt these type of policies, common policies, in order to allow sovereignty and agri-food independence in Gaza. Throughout this forum, we want to build up an activities, feminist activities of the entrepreneur women in the agri-food sector, because the role of the women should be very important at the regional, national, or international level. In our case, and with this crisis that we have in Gaza, all the workers in the agri-food sector, from the job or the occupation that the embargo, more than 15 years, the pandemic, the restrictions, the effects of the climate changes that have aggravated the situation, the arrival of this pandemic and the vulnerability on the low capacity of the entrepreneurs, we cannot be able to diminish the effect of the climate change. It's because of that we want to have new tools in order to strengthen the resilience and to be able to support the capacity buildings, the training, technological training, digitalization, access to marketing, access to the market, in order to this market could help women. And there are other factors, of course, that have allowed to develop these projects of the women entrepreneur in the agri-food sector. We want to strengthen, to improve the quality of the products, ensuring training to those women and protecting the consumers as well. They have offered different facilities, and we have 63 cards of certification, of qualification, having a legal coverage in order to ensure the quality of the product, enabling the access to the market. Those projects, they have taxes, levies, and have to being able to have labeling of quality. The forum has set up the partnerships with others partners, and in order to improve small projects among all feminine projects, and given some bourses in order to ensure the perennity of the project at Gaza level, that throughout these small agri-food projects could be able to help. And after having fixed the needs of the project, we have presented the raw materials, we have presented the follow-up of the procedures of production in order to attenuate the restriction of the climate effects and increasing the employability. In the recent months, we have participated in financing campaign with an Australian organization in order to help these women entrepreneurs, and we have joined 25 Australian students that help these women in order to implement these solidarity with these products, with those projects to have access to the market. Afterwards, we will disseminate the products to other vulnerable women in the area and to the associations of people, elderly people. This campaign for the women entrepreneurs have trade, and we have helped to make marketing due to the difficult circumstances in Gaza and in Palestine. Concerning the equity in front of the climate change is a very important moment for the women working in the agri-food sector, and in partnership with the International Committee of Red Cross, we tried to establish a study in order to be confronted to the climate change and the effect on the small agricultures and farmers in Gaza. It will be a pleasure to see higher participation and the response given by all the world that we'd allow the next March. Thank you very much for your help and with the support that we have given to Gaza and the Middle East, the Northern Africa. And I would like to share with you our link concerning the activities that we have undertaken for the innovator women in the resilience in this forum and in the video and the articles. Thank you very much once more. Thank you for the witness that you have brought to us and the energy and the optimism that you have transmitted on us in sharing your beautiful experience. Thank you very much. And I will give the floor to Mrs. Amel Azab. Amel Azab is simultaneously in other forum as well. And thank you very much to make this effort in order to be in two forums and to go from one forum to the other. Amel, you are coordinator of the project facilities for the climate for the Arab Water Council. You are the manager or responsible for the NBCM, which is a regional network in order to build capacities of the water in the Nile Basin. And it's impossible to discuss of the challenges said by the climate change without evocate the water. Amel, can you explain to us how the climate change has an effect on women working in the water sector, and which are the solutions that you will recommend? And finally, I was very interested in order to know the cooperation dynamics that exist and collaboration that you and women made in the Arab Water Council. You have the floor, Ahmed.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Yasmin, and thanks to the organizers of the event for inviting me to represent the Arab Water Council and also to share some of my experiences working in capacity development in the Nile Basin. Talking about climate change from water resources perspective, I would like to share with you some of my technical experiences out of research. So I'm going to talk now wearing the hat of researcher and conveying the messages related to women in this respect. As we all know, climate change is affecting most of our region, the Arab region, and also the whole African continent. Whether we are facing droughts or floods or changes in rain patterns, this is all affecting the agricultural livelihoods in the water scarce regions like our region. A lot of studies were focusing on climate change in relation to gender. And I would like here to pick two examples that I witnessed myself. The first study was focusing on the nexus between gender, migration, and climate change. And this study showed that research results can prove that migration can be climate induced. And it can be a result of climate impact and climate, let's say, focused impact in our regions. Whether it is forced migration after natural disasters like flash floods or droughts because of the change in the seasonal variation of the rainfall, but it can be also adaptation process. When migration happens, it's one of the adaptation process, but it's a severe one actually. Women, when we zoom to women's situation in these kind of studies, maybe one of the concerns is that most of the studies happening does not focus on gender as an important component of research. But I was privileged to have worked in this study, which is under the Climate Facility Research Project, the first study I'm going to focus on. And it has been dealing with the women situation in relation to climate-induced migration. We know that women are agricultural producers and they are hard workers. They work in agriculture without getting paid most of the time because most of their salaries or payments and wages goes to the families and sometimes to the men. And this is a challenge. And they are often household water managers. They focus on managing the access to water for the families. And they play an active role in household economy. They try to support the families by raising smaller livestock or maybe by limited ownership of assets. And most of the time, they are hard workers, but they don't get access to ownership. They are not landowners, for example, and this is one of the challenges. Climate change has become an important migration driver in our region, and we had 2 case studies in Jordan and in Sudan. And we witnessed in these case studies that there is a direct intersection between climate change impacts and the socioeconomic situation in the region. Specifically talking about gender inequality. What we concluded out of the studies is that climate change and migration affect men and women. Of course, it's not a women problem, but they affect men, women, children, and elders differently. And this is one of the results that we reached. Women migrate with their families nationally or even internationally when there is a climate disaster, especially in rural areas. They have to maybe cross borders to fetch water for their agriculture, or even to have access to water as a source of life. What we notice also is that women and migration do not commonly feature in the climate change policies in most of the countries' climate supporting policies. Most of the countries' policies are not well addressing gender aspects. Some countries are having very good examples, and maybe Jordan is one of the first countries that have been mainstreaming gender into climate policies. So we have good examples, but they are very rare and we need to replicate in other countries. Maybe as a conclusion of the problem is that women face particular vulnerabilities when it relates to climate change and access to water resources, for agriculture, for livelihoods, for the source of life. To have some recommendations or solutions for this case, as the first case I'm trying to share with you, is that maybe we should undertake research on a more localized regions where we can focus on the vulnerabilities, the migration, the impact of the climate change extreme events on the migration, and also to inform the targeted policies that address the distinct priorities of men and women. They both respond differently to climate impacts. And most of the time, men migrate and leave the families with women. So women are responsible for the families, responsible to fetch water for the agriculture, responsible to get livelihood, limited resources for their families. So it's a situation that we should address in research with evidence-based case studies, so we can find solutions and we can inform policy. Also, we have to ensure that climate policy are addressing the women priorities in climate change. For example, the better access to agriculture assets, the resources, the irrigation water, which in some cases might be rare. Women migrants' priorities in climate change include the social and economic protection. So there should be protection programs for women to face the severity of climate change impact. Also, capacity building of the group of vulnerable communities, not only the women, I'm talking here about the women and even the youth and the children who are sometimes working in the fields. They should get access to capacity development, to awareness raising, to know how to use simple technologies to support their livelihoods or access to water for their daily use. Also, there is an issue that we have been discussing, that the Green Climate Fund is there, but we don't know how to get access to it when it comes to gender. So there should be support to women and gender groups, whether they are on the professional level or in the communities, to get access to the green climate funding, to support them by maybe SMEs, some small projects in the region, so they can face the problem when it comes to climate change. Another example that I would like to share with you is related to ecosystems management. Maybe a case study that we had in Egypt, in one of the wetlands. We were focusing on studying the ecosystem services economic valuation for wise use. And here there was a focus on wetlands, one of the wetlands on the Mediterranean border of Egypt, where we have a lot of coastal lakes. Women there are working in the wetlands, in agriculture, in selling fish, in making working with reed to make their daily income sometimes, but they are not getting access to money. The money again goes for the families, or the men are getting the direct access to money. We had an interesting study where we focused on the economic valuation of the ecosystem service of the wetlands from a gender perspective. We had worked in the field with women groups to ask them about further understanding about the value of the services. And do they get access to it or not? Are they having access to resources, to income or not? And out of this study, we noticed that there is a big barrier, which is the cultural barrier. Women work very hard in these areas, but because of the cultural barrier, they are not listened their voices are not listened to. They are working very hard, but they are not getting the access to the funding, to better education in some of these regions. So a lot of problems come out of research, evidence-based research, working in the fields close to the communities and discussing with them. This is another story that I wanted to share with you from the research perspective. And here, one of the recommendations was that there is a big need to raise awareness on the importance of wetlands and the values of ecosystems and the services, and people living around these areas, and specifically women who are working hard to understand the rights to access the resources, not only to work and not get well paid or well recognized. So that was one of the key issues. And also to try to cross the cultural barrier that deprived them from the rights to be heard and to have a representation in the societies. The fishermen societies and the other agricultural societies, they are not well represented. This was also one of the research evidence-based studies. I will directly jump to the other part of the question, Yasmin, when you asked about the collaboration with UN Women. I'm privileged also to work with the Arab Water Council, as you mentioned, the collaboration with UN Women and the Arab Water Council is a very strong one. We are collaborating in two directions. The first one is through developing research focusing, as I mentioned, on the nexus between gender, migration, and climate change. Developing case studies in a couple of countries. Currently, we are working on Sudan and Jordan, and we are going to extend the research this year to another, let's say, expanded focus in relating the research to policy informing. So we need to have the results of the research as policy informing outputs, focusing on trying to support the change of policies when it comes to women empowerment and support in the climate, local climate policies. The other important collaboration with UN Women is through the GWI group that Saira mentioned. I also had the privilege to attend the Women Leadership publication announcement. And this group is the Gender Equality and Empowerment Group, which is a voluntary group under UNDRR. And the focus of this group actually is to work on collection of gender data related to different aspects of water resources, so it can be used in research and it can advocate for gender-oriented research, and also we focus on capacity development of the governments and organizations to mainstream gender empowerment in their local policies. And the other issue that we try to advocate for empowering women in leadership. A lot of activities are happening under the GWI group, and we also were privileged to be partners in or contributing in the publication. And one of the contributions was from AWC on building a network for Arab women working in the water sector. The network was launched a couple of years ago, but we are announcing today a relaunch where we go from the objectives and the establishment to actions on the ground, to have activities, mainly capacity development activities and research to support women in the water sector. So this is in brief what we are trying to do, or what I'd like to share with you from my experience in both jobs, whether I am in the Nile Basin or the Arab region. Women are facing same problems everywhere, and they need to be empowered and they need to be heard. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I enjoyed very much the other presenters' talks about women empowerment. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Amel. Thank you very much, all our panelists, for the intervention, which has been complementary. I think that the term complementary, interrelation, is something that the conducting thread of this webinar, giving the floor to the collaboration with you all. And it will be a way to support and not to work anymore in silos, because we are aware of our forces, our complementarities. Thank you very much for your intervention. And now we give the floor to Tina that have collected the questions raised in the chat. Tina is going to ask the question to the different panelists. Thank you very much.
It was a very, very rich and interesting discussion. A lot of comments in the chat, comments of appreciation especially. A lot of what our panelists shared really triggered the attention of our participants. We have a lot of comments going in the direction of the very many challenges that women face, trying to really give a sense of the complexity also of the work on gender equality and women's empowerment, trying to address all the different constraints. Interesting also comment on how do we define decent or quality jobs, that I think is mentioned that Dina Najjar mentioned at the beginning. So how do we define decent and quality jobs, especially when it comes to different gender-based constraints and different gender-based needs. But there is a question that I think it's relevant for all of our speakers. So I'll throw it there to see who wants to take it. And it's a question that comes repeatedly, I think, for all of us who work on gender equality. And it's the extent to which, when we address the constraints faced by women, to what extent culture, social norms, gender norms are really the key constraint to address. And more concretely, how do we address this cultural barriers? How do we address this socio-cultural norms in order to really enable this transformative change that we need in the context specifically of agri-food systems and climate change? I think this is a different question. All of you could answer from different perspectives. So maybe starting with the first speakers. I don't know if Dina or Wafa wants to intervene on that, but again, maybe that's an opportunity for you to give us your final points on this crucial topic.
Valentina, I can go, but would you like me to start with a decent work question, or
if you have a point on that? Yeah. Yes, why not?
Yes. Let me be brief. I have 2 points on that. We have operationalized decent work for rural women empowerment with FAO, and I can share the report in the box. I'm having issues with connection, but I'll try to share it. So I just want to point out 2 things. The first one is asset accumulation. So when you are working, you also want to be having productive resources so that you can grow. Quality jobs, and means being able to be mobile, moving from wage worker to entrepreneur or to own account worker. So how can you, which the wage worker is basically you just have your body, and then if you want to own a shop and so on. So what we found is that women were less mobile because they were working out of necessity. So most of the money that they were generating were spending on necessity and basic issues like food, basic needs. However, men were able to move out from wage work into having a tuk-tuk or a shop, and then they were still involved in wage work, but they were able to move. But we also found that when everybody in the family was working, the resources were pooled, and the purchased land, because we were working in areas where land was cheap, it was in the desert, the land was purchased in the name of the man. And we have seen cases where, in the cases of divorce or separation, women lost and they had to go back into wage work well into their 50s. So this issue of asset accumulation is important. Dignity is another pillar of decent work. So what we also found was that it was shameful for women to be working in certain jobs. They were covering their faces because they were accused of, they experienced reputational damage because they were standing working very close physically to men in transportation and so on. So that's the two things I want to focus on. And there's a whole 63 pages where I could share how we operationalize this work.
That's good to know.
And the other thing, very quickly, to talk about how can we address gender norms. I think that's a really good question. I also think that some norms are more sticky than others. For example, the language that is used in extension system, I keep giving this example because I was really astonished how cross-cutting this issue of brother farmer I saw everywhere, not only in digital extension, but in many booklets and so on. And when you go into a research extension institute, applied and research, you will see that women are doing soap, traditional, I think my colleague Wafa has already touched on that. So really looking at trying to address women as farmers, or just using gender neutral language, Azizi Muzarawa, Azizati Muzarawa. So this, I think, will help raise awareness on this issue, but issues around inheritance are way more sticky. So yeah, policy change plus awareness raising, I would say.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Two important points already: gender inclusive language, and then obviously, I think this link that you had on the land inheritance rights brings to the policy. So I'll ask Wafa if she wants to intervene on that, because since she gave us the government policy perspective, to what extent policy can help transform cultural and gender norms, or is the other way around? Should be actually the policies that follow the change in the culture.
Thank you, Valentina. Actually, I would say it is both ways. It doesn't work one way only. It is two tracks, and sometimes bottom up and top down. This is something really that we have been experiencing in our interventions also, both at the policy and the field levels. Really, I mean, these are the gender norms and the cultural barriers have been identified as the most critical, really, constraints. And I would say that really, I mean, we have very good successful stories from Lebanon that I can quickly share with you, and and I'm sure you in person, Valentina, you are aware also of many of them, but gender awareness, this is really critical. We have to go deep into the gender roles and dynamics at the household levels, and especially in the agricultural communities. I mean, there is a lot of power dynamics there still existing. The cultural barriers, they really prevent women to, to present or excel in their knowledge and experiences because of mobility, of course, one element, but it's not really very big in Lebanon, at least. But there is also the access to the resources. There is also a lot of responsibilities and the division of tasks between men and women, and how they prescribe the roles. So I think gender awareness and understanding and involving men as well in these, especially when it comes to engaging them and giving them really the role to be part of the change, in the sense of understanding the importance of women's engagement in economic activities, bringing also more income to the families, and applying these gender transformative tools that FAO has developed and other organizations at the level of communities, because these are really, I mean, these are good successful stories that might really do some changes at the intra-household levels. Of course, I mean, this is not at the national level, because a lot of interventions and lot of commitments, and these have to be really adopted as part of the national strategies with very clear indicators on the gender equality outcomes that we need to achieve as part of our interventions, which is not really still not that strong. We can't see it a lot. So I would say, I would stop here because, these are two examples of what could be done, but the way is really long and difficult.
But thank you for pointing to I think a very concrete solution. So awareness and the role of engaging men in this change of mentality, and also this idea of intervening at multiple levels, including the household level. I do think that that most of interventions in the agricultural sector tend to be a bit stereotypical in the way they address women and men as in their different tasks and responsibilities. So also having a different perception on the intra-household dynamics, it's very important. Saira, I also come to you with a similar question. We had the chance to talk about it, but I think that cultural norms and gender stereotypes comes up very strongly if you're trying to document experiences of women's leadership. I don't know if there's a final comment you want to make on that, and what seemed to be helpful to really support this change and transformation based on the experience of your work.
Yes, thank you very much, Valentina, and everybody. I think as our panelists are saying about this awareness raising and other areas that needs to be, prioritized. I have one comment that, the gender empowerment comes through the family support. And family support and family culture and the mindset of the society cannot change if our girls and women are not allowed to work. And empowerment comes with working, with education, and all of this. It comes when we have a culture and setup where girls and women are encouraged to go out and explore their areas of interest, which unfortunately in the Arab world, and not even in the Arab world.
Bring it from there.
So I'm emphasizing again, globally, somehow or the other, women are not taken seriously, and they are just there are different rules when it comes to men and different rules when it comes to women. So that's a challenge, and I think awareness raising and also, setting an example. There are women here who can, bring an example to their families, to their countries, to their work. But this is a slow process to have everybody integrated into this. Women empowerment, it takes time because this mindset is ingrained in our society in a certain way where we do not allow women to take decisions on their own. And especially I'm talking about decision-making power. It's not with the woman. Most of them, they have to look upon some way to the other. If they are not married, it's their fathers, their brothers, their whatever. If they are married or they have partners, everything is related around some kind of power control. That needs to be changed, They should be equally given chances. These chances can come when we have more vocal voices, when we talk about it more often, and we are not shy to talk about it. Because sometimes we just say, okay, I know, and women have to support each other. Sometimes our women are also not supporting each other. If you come to, this is my perception, sometimes when you're working at the international level or local level, regional, wherever you are pushed down not by men, sometimes by women. And
good point.
Sometimes you're pressurized by your mother, so you don't know. So this mindset to controlling, is a psyche which put us down. And I think, and so we should take gender as women and men, both of us needs to, broaden our horizon. Otherwise, we will keep continuing in this power game. That how to bring the other person down. We need to support each other. Either it is a man, either it is a female, it's a woman. All of us have to support each other when it comes to for increasing development in the region. And that's what I feel it's a major concern. And that is what I have experienced working in for so long, and also dealing with this women empowerment issues and working for this publication. We try to create a gender balance and have our male speakers to talk about women empowerment. And they spoke really well today when they are talking about women in Somalia, for instance, how they are working hard for their families, but men have a different mindset, and they are neglecting. They think that they are just here to listen. They cannot make decisions. And similarly, I think it's vice versa. So I think we need to support each other for a better society. It should be both ways.
Yeah, I totally agree. Sorry to interrupt. I just want to give also the other speakers the opportunity to intervene on that, and particularly also to Ala, because a lot of the comments in the chat pointed actually to the particularly difficult context in Palestine. And I think that was a useful reminder that today we discussed about the gender and climate change nexus, but obviously building resilience may mean building resilience to really multiple shocks and crises. We have seen it with the pandemic in the past 2 years, but definitely in the region, there's the issue of conflict and protracted crisis, which add a layer of complexity to the management of natural resources and addressing climate change. So Ala, I think the forum is already through the capacity development working along on changing, let's say, gender norms and cultural norms. But again, I want to give you also the opportunity to comment on that. What is something that you are doing concretely to change the mentality and support women's empowerment?
شكرا فالنتينا. من خلال عملنا مع النساء لسنوات عديدة، أنا أعتقد أن النساء قويات جدا، مبدعات، محاربات ومجتهدات. أي نعم.
Women are stronger, they are more innovative. There are many obstacles, there are many laws, there are many impeachments in Palestine and Gaza. So they can progress as we feel, but we need permanent policies. In general terms, we are digging on stones, on rocks, but even if it's slow, there are consequences. There are some influences from very scratch. There is the work of everyone, women, young people, who are trying to put forward policies that guarantee the rights of these women, but sometimes these things are not applied. In other cases, there is no protection for women. They do not have facilities when it comes to pay their taxes. I can add that the women in Gaza are suffering from embargo, from occupation, from COVID. Most of families lost the relatives of some of them. But from my experience with women with small projects, I think that with a minimum of possibilities, a minimum of baseline products that are too expensive right now. But I have to say that women are entrepreneurs. They are striving to further develop this manufacturing of products, and with local support, I think you will find it hard to imagine in Gaza. But how the hell can I build a collaboration between men and women? That's why family agriculture have to be supported on equal foot. We have to adopt policies of support of women, and we have to raise the awareness of men. When we have a hope, we are going to try to ensure this change, even if we are talking of small changes. But there is much significance to this because we will have a hope to develop local and national products in favor of women. I want to greet all the women on the occasion of the Women International Day, the entrepreneur, whether it is at home or outside their houses. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you also for sharing this very, concrete experience which coming from interacting. Amel, I'm coming for you for a final remark, and I think you probably have a lot to say because water, I think, is a sector in which is still proving difficult sometimes, not only to engage women, because women are already doing a lot of the work, but to convince the colleagues who work on with women that actually there is a gender issue there. It's not only about technical issues. So I'm really excited to hear your final comment on that.
Thank you, Valentina. Indeed, the women are facing challenges, but I think they are very strong and they started to put marks on the technical arena when it comes to their participation in different technical jobs and leadership jobs. Maybe you are facing a problem of perception or understanding that we can be decision makers and we can be managers who can create a difference. We still face this problem in the different water sectors, especially in the government. We have positions and women reach high positions in the government. But when it comes to decision making, they are not fully supported to take the final decision. So it's, I don't like to say it's on the paper or it is, but it is not really applicable when it comes to decision making. Very rare quota for women to be real decision makers in the water sector. Another important issue is that when it comes to research or training, and I want to focus on this issue because I see it a lot. When we talk about gender inclusiveness, until this moment, people see it as just please bring more women to training courses, or please bring a couple of researchers into a research project. No, it's much more beyond this. It is to have a component in your training, for example, on gender. If it is a topic on water resources management, please bring a module specialized, focusing on gender aspects and talk about gender issues, not only by bringing participants who are females. This is a big difference that I would like to see. Another issue when it comes to research, most of the funded research, they are very keen about inclusiveness of gender. But in reality, it is not well represented. Most of the times, we just want to see a couple of women or females in the research groups. But what about the research itself? What about the topic? Water is about everybody. And dealing with water problems, you are talking about men, women, children, everybody on Earth. So when it comes to research, please include more components of research packages that relate to gender, that test gender situation on the ground. So we can collect data related to gender and we really know what is the situation and what is the reality, instead of just thinking in a kind of sometimes superficial way, I would say. This is very important. And I think I heard a lot of very impressive and enthusiastic talks from the colleagues before. So I would like to leave it here. Maybe supporting women in the water sector. We still need a lot to be changed, but we are going on, and I believe change will come because it's about life and it's about sharing, and it's not about women or men only. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think a very, very beautiful final remark. I could continue this conversation for hours, but I need to be mindful of the time. So it is my pleasure to invite His Excellency, the Ambassador John Paul Gregg, who's the Deputy Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean, to give us his closing remarks. His Excellency, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, distinguished speakers, participants. First of all, let me thank you on behalf of the UfM for the really inspiring discussion which I've assisted to today, and for all your valuable inputs today to the debate. A word of appreciation goes to also the FAO and the CIHEAM for sharing this timely initiative to celebrate the International Women's Day this year.
I'm afraid we have some connection issues. Let's give maybe a moment to Ambassador Greg to reconnect. I can catch the opportunity to thank all the speakers because before I was too worried about the time, but indeed it was a very, very interesting discussion. And I really hope that this webinar is just an opportunity for us to build on this network. I know that some of us know each other, but it's always, I find these opportunities always useful to really build a network for continuing the work. And actually, a lot of the participants have shared the interest to receiving the information about the webinar. I see that Ambassador Greg is online again, so.
That we are going through, but this goes beyond our control sometimes. So I'll just take off where I left. The recently released IPPC 2022 report confirmed that a more gender responsive, climate resilient development action is also strongly needed because of the role of women in our global agri-food system. Although women are critical agents in the system, comprising 43% of agricultural workers, the World Economic Forum estimates that it will take 135 years to close the gender gap. The COVID-19 crisis have reversed gains in gender equality while intensifying climate-related stresses. Lack of final inclusion of women also limits their ability to access financing for climate-related disaster risk management. This, despite the fact that women and girls are often more exposed to climate-related agricultural risks, which are amplified due to climate change, while their assets are more likely to be sold first to cope with shocks. It is scientifically acknowledged that failure to consider women's specialized knowledge in the land, water, fisheries, and forestry policies and planning can lead to poor outcomes, including loss of biodiversity, water pollution, soil degradation, loss of forest cover, not to mention failure to mitigate and adapt to climate change. As in other areas, women leadership is a key factor to be ensured while outlining climate resilient policies. It remains fundamentally important that women actively participate in discussions and decisions over climate change mitigation and adaptation, as well as other related issues, given that women have a unique set of skills and knowledge which help respond to climate change effectively and sustainably. With a view to address such challenges from the perspective of an intergovernmental organization such as the UfM, all 42 member states participating in the last UfM Ministerial Declaration on Environment and Climate Change committed to integrate gender and youth considerations into climate and environmental policies, actions and investments, taking also into account vulnerable groups, not least through tailored, gender-responsive capacity building measures and enhanced participation of women and youth in environment and climate policy making, implementation and monitoring. The water, employment and research agendas of the Union for the Mediterranean have embedded the gender dimension when it comes to the adaptation strategies of climate change. Distinguished participants, the Union for the Mediterranean and the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, have joined forces with Business Club Africa to launch the first MENA Women Business Club. This initiative involves more than 130 women entrepreneurs and aims to create better networking opportunities and help their business grow in the region. The large majority of them work in the agro-food sector. The Union for the Mediterranean has also supported the Flowers Project, which trains, informs, and offers support to Moroccan and Tunisian women in rural areas, precisely to cope with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and also climate change. In conclusion, the Union for the Mediterranean is committed to maintain women empowerment at the heart of its agenda. During 2022, the nexus between gender equality and climate change will be further explored in cooperation with national governments, as well as our regional partners, such as the FAO and CIHEAM. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And it has been a great pleasure. Thank you, participants, for the engagement. Yasmin, Anna.
Yes, thank you very much. I don't know if Anna is connected, but she proposed you in the chat that we could at a moment take a photo for this International Women's Day, but not a simple photo of okay, Anna.
I'm sorry, we have some technical issues.
No problem. It's a solidarity. So I was mentioning the photo, but please, I let you explain it. Thank you.
Yes, I wanted also to thank you to all of you, all the speakers, all the participants for their for joining us today. I really appreciate all the exchange on the chat, and as I said at the beginning, we will share the full recording because the event was live streamed on Facebook, on our website, and on YouTube. We will also circulate a document with the main recommendations, and hopefully, as at the beginning, also from your representative and confirmed by our ambassador, this will be the first step of long-term cooperation, focus on gender equality, on climate change and agro-food, and as mentioned at the beginning from the Assistant Director General of FAO, COP27 is really a key deadline for us for this year in the MENA region especially. Thank you again, and I will now ask you to our speakers to just stay a few minutes more with us after the end of the webinar to take a family picture. Thank you again. See you soon.